Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us on this, depending on where you are, sunny Thursday afternoon. My name is Jonathan, and I'll be running the webinar today. The name of the webinar is Shift in Demand for Data Governance Roles and what it means to DPOs. Just some housekeeping stuff I'll go through with you before I hand it over to our lead presenter, Kevin. If you are facing any technical difficulties, please feel free to send me a private message, and I will be there on the dot to help you out. If you have any questions for Kevin or any of his panelists, please post them under the Q&A tab on the right-hand side of the top right-hand side of your screen. With that, let me hand it over to our lead presenter for today, Mr. Kevin Shepherdson. Kevin, over to you.
All right, welcome everyone. We're still waiting for a bunch of folks to come in. I'd like to take this opportunity to say hello to all of you, wherever you are. I'm aware that we have people from Philippines and other countries, and for those of you who are our supporters and our learners, welcome back. And for those of you who are new, we are from the Data Protection Excellence Network. We're going to wait for more of the participants to come on board, and soon I will be introducing you to our panel of speakers. Right, so let me share my screen and then we can start shortly. So a gentle reminder to all of you that as we go through the presentation, you can go into the Q&A section and put in your questions. And at the end of the session, I will be looking at the questions and trying to get the panel to answer them. I will not be able to answer all of the questions, but we'll do our best, right, to address as many questions as possible. And as usual, we will be making the presentation available, so don't worry. And finally, I would like to just get everyone to take note of the fact that the topic that we are going to be covering is on a job search study survey. And it has huge implications. The findings that we have has huge implications on the role of the data protection officer, which gels nicely with the topic that Jonathan has shared, a shift in demand for data governance role.
I'm sure that I know plenty of you that are on the line as well. So hello to you again, and hello for the first time to those of you who are new to us. Take care.
Fantastic. And then we've also invited our head of consultancy in the region, William Hill. And William, say hi to everyone. And
hello, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, it's my pleasure this afternoon to be one of the panel speakers on this exciting topic, which I think it will generate quite a bit of interest among the audience here this afternoon. My background is in IT. I've been working at the field of IT, first with the government for 25 years, then recently with the private sector for about 10 or so years. So I've been working with Kevin and the Straits Interactive on doing all sorts of exciting data protection projects in different industry sectors of different sizes. And it's my pleasure this afternoon to be one of the speakers and hope to interact more with you.
Fantastic. Now, we've also asked our financial controller, and she's the head of data governance as well in Straits Interactive. And the reason why I paused is because I think I've asked her to share the research because it was her team that did the research, which we are going to be sharing with all of you. That is links to the topic of what it means to the DPOs today. So, Hui-Chin, say hi to everyone, yeah?
Hello everyone, my name is Hui-Chin. Yeah, as Kevin has shared, I'm currently the financial controller of Straits. My previous life, or rather my first half of my job career was actually financial audit. So I have been a financial auditor for the longest time before I decided to jump over to the other side of the fence and become the creator of the accounts, which is financial controller. And very exciting today to be able to share with you the results of the research. Hand over to you, Kevin.
All right, folks, if you guys are ready, what I'm going to be doing today is with our panel of speakers is we will be starting by talking about the trends that we saw last year. And it's important because one of it was the transition. We saw the transitioning happening from data protection to data governance. So I'll be doing a quick review of that. And then we are going to be looking at the job search study, which is the bulk of today's session. Some very interesting findings, which basically shows that what we predicted is actually happening. Data protection is moving towards data governance. And I'll do a very quick review of DPO roadmap for those of you interested to move towards data governance. And we will end off by chatting with the panelists on their thoughts with regards to data governance and generative AI. I'm sure you folks have been observing what's going on, right? We see the value of generative AI, but we are also seeing the risks and the constraints. So to the panel speakers, are you folks ready to start?
Yes, more than ready.
Okay, if you guys are ready, let's now take a look in terms of looking back. And what I'd like to do here is to basically go through what we saw a year ago. Now, if you had attended our session, the early part of the year, we will always predict certain trends. And as you can see, early last year, we had 5 trends. And if you look at the trend number 3, right, besides the digital transformation that we were seeing going on, the continued privacy breaches, we predicted that data protection will transition to data governance as the demand for data protection related expertise actually grows. Yeah. And if you had seen our session, you will notice that we actually encourage the data protection teams to quickly move towards starting a data governance team within your organization, right? Because we were mindful that the shortage of data protection expertise means obviously there's going to be increased job opportunities and better career progression, which is why we work with SMU to introduce a whole bunch of courses in data protection and data governance. And I also remember, Lynn, you were telling everyone, right, that they should also be familiar with the General Data Protection Regulation. And obviously, for all of us at the Data Protection Excellence Network, we wanted to get involved with all the activities here, right, as the industry moves towards data governance. Yeah. So with that, what I'd like to do here is, using this as a reference, I'd like to present to you the findings of our job survey. And as I go through this, I will be asking Hui-Chin to give you guys more meat on exactly what we did in the survey. So Hui-Chin, very quickly, the objectives. I think we do this every year. We've done it for what, 8 years already? Your thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah, time flies. So coming to the 8th year, and in fact, when we backtrack to the initial intention of doing this survey was really to look up for the demand of the data protection jobs. So over the years, we have actually able to track and project based on our studies about this demand and project it over the next 2 to 3 years so that we can help our data protection professionals to prepare themselves for what's upcoming. And so through this research, we also gain some insights and profile of the demand so that we know what the market is actually looking for in terms of requirements, job responsibilities, and competencies.
Fantastic. So folks, before we share with you, I'd like to go through some of the background information. And what we did to bring you guys the findings was we actually scanned a whole bunch of job ads, and they were all related to data protection and related positions. And as you can see on the screen, we actually looked at many sources and we monitored all of those job ads. And I believe, Hui-Chin, we also removed the duplicate one. So we only captured the unique job positions. Would that be right? Yeah.
Yes. As we know that the same job can be posted in multiple portals, but that is really what we will do after we grab all the data. We'll do a cleanup and make sure that whatever that falls into our data for analysis are all unique entries.
So what we did, ladies and gentlemen, was when we look at the job ads, we look at specific positions, and I just want everyone to know how we defined it. So we look at what we call sole or dedicated DPO. These are job ads that specifically requested for a position relating to a DPO, or where the role is primarily data protection role. Now, we also look at the data protection office, where, as you can see, it's not just the DPO. While the role is primarily a DPO, many times the advertisement might be double hatting with other secondary functions. So it is not a sole dedicated DPO, but it double hats with IT, with HR, with legal, and all of those similar departmental responsibilities. Now, we also monitored the market in terms of jobs that actually relate or included data protection requirements. And while these are not DPO positions, you could see that in the description, they also included that position would support data protection, might support the DPO committee, or the ad might say, hey, data protection knowledge is specifically required. Yeah. So we do know that there's all this consciousness of data protection requirements with regards to what the role is supposed be. Yeah, and if you go further, you can see that at the same time, we also picked up job positions that are related to a data governance role. They might be members of the data governance office, but we were specifically looking at the role where data governance is the primary role in terms of what the ad is looking for. Now, inevitably, we also noticed that advertisements that relates to data protection related services. So it could be an ad looking for a consultant, trainer, and so forth, right? Before we move on, Hui-Chin, anything else you'd like to add in while we get everyone to understand what the results are all about? Yeah.
Yeah, so moving forward, when we actually present our slides, bear in mind that these are the categories that we are going to dissect.
So to go further, folks, you will notice that we will use the word DPO related jobs. So the keyword is DPO. When we talk about DPO, we're talking about the DPO function, which might relate to a dedicated DPO, the DPO office. It might also relate to a data governance role and also a provider of data protection related service. Now we differentiate them with data protection related jobs, which includes everything, including jobs which reference data protection as a requirement, although the job might not be related fully to a DPO role. Okay, so to give everyone an understanding of how this might look like, you can see that this is how sole dedicated DPO ad might look like. So you can see the DPO, it describes the position, and you can see develop, implement policies, alert management. So you can see that the data protection management programs role is specific. Now, this is what we call a DPO office position. It might be IT infrastructure, but this person might also act as a data protection manager. So that will be an example. And when we talk about jobs with data protection requirements, you can see from this description that the ad might reference data protection in it. Yeah. Let me move on and I'll quickly get Hui-Chin to then comment. So these are also other examples that relates to data governance and data protection related services. So with that, if you folks are ready, and William and Lynn, if you are ready, let me now show everyone the actual numbers, a few seconds to observe what is on the screen. And you will notice that the numbers have been climbing all the way. If you look at the 2016, it was only 42 job positions. Now, I want to remind everyone, this is only 1 month of job postings. So for a whole month, we monitor the market, and then we use that 1 month to project how the whole year's demand is going to be. So if you see the chart here, 2016, there were 42 job positions in a single month. And every year during that period, we will also survey the market. So if you take a look all the way from 2016 to 2021, there's been an increase, and in 2022, the numbers have increased. And for those of you who are very observant, you can see that this is during the COVID-19 period. And before I talked about what happens in 2023, you will notice that enforcements have an impact. Every time there's an enforcement the following year, the job positions will go up. And for those of you in Singapore, you might also remember the SingHealth breaches, plus quite a few breaches in the health sector. So before I get our panel of speakers to comment on this slide, you could see that last year, and during the same period, there's been a drop of 35% based on the overall data protection related jobs. Yeah, Lynn, a penny for your thoughts.
Yeah, I'd have to say that in 2020, when we first had the circuit breaker and then all the rest that followed, I was surprised that so many organizations were spending money on governance related things, including data protection, but also various kinds of staff training. And I was surprised because they're not getting any revenue. But at the same time, they didn't have people traveling all over the place. People were in the same spot. So they were investing for the future, I think, in 2020, in 2021 as well. 2022, well, things were going back to normal to a reasonable extent, but you've got to build up from the last couple of years of things getting done. So I really think that 2023 is more of a normalization. It's shown here as a fall, which is true, but 2022 was an aberration, at least from what I'm seeing generally amongst organizations.
William, what about you? You see the drop, right? Drop by about 35%. And your thoughts on this?
I would not look at it as a drop, because if you look at the year before, 2022, there was a sharp rise. So the way I see it is, if we recall, COVID hit the world in the year 2020, and then around 22, towards the end of 22 or 23, we could see signs of recovery. So it could be organizations are preparing for the situation going back to normal. So they're planning for the future, just like what Lynn has said earlier. So I'd like to echo that. So there could be a sharp increase in recruitment of DPO positions. to anticipate, to cater for the future needs. 2023 is back to normal. If we were to plot this in terms of a moving average, then that will give a more accurate picture. Yeah, then we see a more stable growth rather than troughs and peaks, which could be just one-off.
And another explanation that I would also offer is that during this period, there was a lot of concerns, right, about privacy with COVID-19. And many companies were also very cautious, right? And they also took this opportunity to beef up their practices, as you heard from our two speakers. And if you move that anomaly aside, then you see it's actually a natural progression over the years. We're now in the post-COVID-19 period. Let's dissect this chart in a little more detail. And I want everyone to see this little fall and look at the breakdown in terms of the relevant data protection segments. And let me just quickly share with everyone how to read this chart. You will notice that the green color bars are what we call the data governance roles. If you recall, this means that in the job ad, it specifically mentions in the job position that it is related to data governance, or the main role is seen in the description itself. And now what is interesting, I want everyone to take a look at the green bars only. And we've actually been monitoring this every year. And it was all minuscule. We noticed a rise in 2022, there was 41, but what was very surprising to us, that in last year's survey, we noticed a huge jump from 41 to 112, right? It's more than 2 times growth here. Before I ask our panel speakers to comment on this, I will also want to focus on the other numbers. We notice that for the DPO, that means the specific demand for a data protection officer position, you can see has been going up over the years. But while the numbers went up for 2022, the specific demand for the DPO itself has dropped slightly to 69. And if you were to look at the jobs with data protection requirements, that is the one that accounts for the huge fall from a 521 to 236. William, what do you think? Just by looking at this chart and understanding the trends that's going on in the market, and as I said earlier on, right, it's very interesting to see for the first time, data governance positions have exceeded positions for a data protection officer.
Yeah, from the statistics, it's very, very telling. If you compare the green colored bars, you can see there's a marked increase compared to the preceding years in terms of the number of data governance jobs that have been advertised, that companies are looking for people for this new role. And the subsequent drop in the DP related requirements, I would see it as it could be some of the jobs, they have already absorbed data protection into their mainstream job, so they don't highlight that as something. So it's just like if one of the skills that is already quite widespread within a number of job positions within a company, when they advertise that kind of position, they probably will just focus on the primary job, and those which are expected to be part and parcel of the job, they don't highlight it. So that could be the reason for the dip in the numbers in the grey colored bars between 2022 and 2023.
So you are saying that data protection has become culture, right? Everyone is taking that for granted.
Yeah, in a way, yes.
Anymore.
Right.
That's interesting. Lynn, what about your thoughts, Lynn?
Yeah, it seems to me that data governance means different things in different organizations. I'm particularly struck by the extent to which more and more we're seeing data analytics as a subset of data governance, used to increase sales, to improve marketing, to measure all sorts of things. Now, they're going to be using personal data to do that to some extent. They're going to be using non-personal data. Maybe it's data coming from the Internet of Things. I think data governance is becoming a very varied role depending on the organization and what it wants to achieve, which is pretty stimulating as an opportunity, I think.
So Hui-Chin, you led this research, and as you can see, right, we were pretty surprised. I remember you notifying me immediately, but for the first time in so many years, the number of data governance roles has actually exceeded data protection roles by, as you can see, 62%. And you confidently told me that in your analysis, a lot of these where data governance actually appear in the title of the candidate they're looking for. Your quick comments, Hui-Chin?
Yeah, I think this is very much of a result of the digitalization that was forced because of COVID situation. I think back then, a lot of organizations, they are just firefighting and they want to pivot very quickly because everything just go digital. But they realized that now they have a huge data and they need to have some governance in there. And so it was actually driven the company to now look at, I really need to govern this asset that I have. I need to put things in order and put infrastructure into a better governance framework. Yeah, that's why now they're calling for people who know how to actually govern the data and be put in place to actually do something about it.
So, ladies and gentlemen, you have heard this, right? We all know that COVID-19, right, drove a lot of the digitalization efforts, and the numbers here actually justify that from at least the job postings that we have seen. Let's now zoom in specifically to the data governance roles. And I just want to remind everyone, this is just 1 month of data, which means that if we were to project it for a year, straight line projection to a year, that means there were more than 1,200 job postings that indicated the role of data governance inside, right? And you can see over the years, the numbers have been actually very low. But when it came to COVID-19 and the fact that a lot of digital transformation efforts were happening during this period, which was of course an opportune moment for that to happen, you see the correlation that companies were also hiring roles related to data governance. For my speakers, any of you would like to make a comment at this point?
Yeah, I'd like to offer another perspective. I think a lot of organizations begin to realize that in order to fulfill the business objectives, they need all sorts of data, not only just personal data, which is covered by under the data protection role of the DPO, but also includes other kinds of data to make the organization run, to drive the operations, to meet the organization objectives. So it could be sales data that's got no personal data involved, could be market analysis data, could be financials and things like that. Data is one of the key competitive advantages. And we got all sorts of data that's scattered everywhere. Difficult for us to be able to meet our overall company objectives if the data sets are in silos. So this is an opportunity for integration. That's where the governance role comes in. Yeah, and furthermore, also through the governance aspect, there could be economies of scale, and also to look at the areas where more value can be generated by extracting through data analytics, better understanding of the context in which the company is operating in.
Yeah, and I would take that a bit further, because I think, the various objectives that you've mentioned, William, means that there's a wider range of backgrounds for people going into data governance. When I look at the job ads, I don't see, as you do for the DPO roles, X years of data protection experience. I see they need to know about data protection, but maybe they want a marketing background or a economics background or something like that, depending on what it is that the organization is seeking to achieve. So I think it gives a lot more opportunity to people to transition from what they're doing into data governance and putting their skills in that context, particularly for career transition or mid-career transitioning people.
So folks, I'm going to give a definition what data governance is. Yeah, so these are all very good points that we will cover in a little more detail shortly. Let's now zoom in specifically to the job postings that relate to a sole DPO or any data protection officer position, right? Or within the DP office. And as you saw earlier on, what we've done is we've extracted only those trends. And as you can see, the numbers are relatively flat, right, with regards to data protection. But correspondingly, you saw earlier on, there is a larger increase in terms of data governance positions. And I think our speakers have shared with you on what was going on. But what I'd like to point out to all of you, that if you look at the demand for a data protection officer, our next slide actually gives a very interesting insight. So let me explain what this means. You can see from the screen that when there is a job position available looking for a data protection officer, we notice two kinds of postings. One is what we call the sole dedicated DPO. And many times this is being advertised by a large company, right? It could be a Prudential, or it might be a PayPal, or big companies like that. They will be looking specifically for a dedicated DPO. But a lot of the times we find what is called the double hatting DPO. And as I explained earlier on, it means that they've where they were advertised, and the majority of it, lots of it came from My Careers Future, followed by Indeed, Monster, and the rest. Okay, so for those of you who want to place your ads, these are where the ads actually appeared, right? We noticed that before 2021, I think LinkedIn was the most popular. That has now changed in terms of distribution. So I would like to very quickly summarize what we have found in the research. So I'd like to remind everyone there's been a decrease in the data protection jobs in terms of job postings from 2022 to 2023. This has decreased by 35%. And we can already guess this also reflects the market positions where the economic conditions have not been too good. We heard about the Ukraine war, the inflations and all of that. It's also affecting other companies as well, right? Then we have the estimated jobs over the year 2023. There were about 5,000 job adverts that were looking for some kind of data protection function, data governance, and all of that. And as I said earlier on, if you were to zoom in on the details, there have been an increase in data governance jobs. We noted a 173% increase on positions related to data governance. And this has surpassed data protection roles by 62% for the first time. And as you heard from the speakers, these are due to digital transformation efforts that have happened since COVID-19 struck. And you see the importance of data governance. You also saw the experience for DPOs, the job positions. They now require a minimum average of 5 years experience, and this is up from 2022, 40%. And as we said earlier on, many DPO positions are managerial or senior management level positions, which is good because you are now in a position to evangelize, right, the importance or transition to the role of data governance. So what I'd like to do right now is to get the speakers' opinions with regards to transitioning to data governance. We now have statistics to show everyone that the market is indeed moving. But what exactly is data governance? So I'd like to remind everyone that according to the ISO 38505, data governance is about creating an accountability framework. How is that different from PDPA? That accountability framework is used to, that looks at decreasing the risk, but also increasing the value of data. And this enables the organization to achieve its goal. So for many of the data protection officers who have been doing your job, right, effectively, I'm sure, it's not just decreasing the risk, but also increasing the value of the data, which I think William clarified is not just personal data, but all kinds of data. So if you're in data governance, you are looking at the governance aspect where you help to set the direction, put in the roles, policies, standards, and controls, and working with management for the implementation, right? Whether we talk about practices, processes, actions, and controls. So what I'd like to speak to our panel is to ask them what they think about. We noticed this trend that we have key executives sharing with us that a lot of times the DPO or the compliance professionals are perceived as showstoppers. And the objective behind it, obviously, we come from a compliance objective. So a lot of DPOs are rightly looking at how to ensure the organization comply with the data protection requirements, but their focus is on compliance and reducing the risk. So they are sometimes perceived as showstoppers. But when we talk about data governance, we are now talking about the role being an enabling. You're actually enabling the organization in terms of adding value to their business objective, as we shared, that might relate to digital transformation. So it's not just reducing the risk, but also increasing the value of that data. Let's hear from our panel of speakers.
Yeah, I've been working with quite a number of companies and organizations in various industry sectors. The common denominator which I've noticed is that because of the PDPA, it's got strict compliance requirements, the DPO tends to focus more on the compliance aspect to say that, yes, if you want to collect personal data or use personal data, make sure you put in all these controls, make sure that you take cognizance of what you can do and what you can't do. But on the other hand, I also noticed that the PDPA has done organizations a big favor, because there are some of the enlightened users that have been attending some of our PDPA and data protection related training courses and consultancy work and hands-on experiences. They begin to realize PDPA could be a potential showstopper, but a lot of good principles and practices from the PDPA can also be applied to other types of data that are non-personal data. Say, for example, PDPA has got such a thing as a purpose limitation. So in a lot of commercial organizations, who has in the right mind has a time to define what's the purpose or why they're collecting all kinds of sales data, all kinds of do all kinds of analytics. But this forces them to think in terms of purpose. Yeah, because the purpose then will make sure that they collect only the essential data that will meet their objectives to fulfill their requirements. Yeah, so other things like even data retention, this is something a lot of organizations don't care about. We just keep the data forever and forever. So because of the knowledge they gain through data protection, protecting personal data, now they become more conscious and more aware of there should be a limit, the retention period for the data, even commercial data, even business data.
Lynn, very quickly, I've got to move on, but I'd like to hear from you. Is that perception true? Showstopper? And would you agree that you can actually become an enabler? You are still
I mean, I'm a showstopper. I've worked as regional general counsel. I've worked as regional head of compliance. People within the organisation would come to me when everything's done up into a nice parcel with a pretty bow on it and say, can we do this? And it's like, hell no. People are now, I think, changing. They'll come to legal and compliance, I hope, much earlier and say, our objective is to end up at such and such a point. Let's talk about how we can get there in a compliant way. And in that way, you move from being a showstopper to an enabler.
Exactly. So very quickly, let me just summarize what Lynn is saying. So be there early, be a trusted advisor. So you are seen as an enabler, but don't wait, it's too late, right? So get involved in the planning so you have visibility of what the company's plans are. And as you heard from Lynn and William, this is how you can position yourself as an enabler, supporting them in their business objectives. Now, I'm just going to quickly go through a whole bunch of slides just to give everyone a reminder of what's going on. Pre-COVID, there was a lot of concern about privacy invasive technologies, the concerns about cloud computing, Internet of Things, what's happening on social media. You see the whole big data efforts that were going on, including artificial intelligence. And it was against this backdrop that we saw the importance of data protection and data privacy. And for those of you who are data protection officers, you know by now, it is not in theory. You will need to look at operational compliance. So you might read the book that I've written with Lynn and William, The 99 Privacy Breaches. You can see that a crucial part in that operational compliance is to look at every stage of the life cycle. When you collect data, you use data, you store or dispose data, or you disclose or transfer data. There are many exposures that you got to look at it operationally. And when you apply the data protection principles, whether you're in Philippines, whether in Malaysia, Singapore, you can actually map the data protection principles, or in Singapore's case, the PDP obligations to each phase of the life cycle, because you apply those obligations or principles to address the relevant issues. And this is what you should be doing at the operational level. And that is the reason why, ladies and gentlemen, Data Protection Office is in a good position to move towards the next phase of data governance. And if you had followed our webinars previously, you can see that if data governance is about reducing risk, it is also about increasing the value of that data. And to do that very quickly, we talked about moving from compliance objective to a business objective, a digital transformation objectives. And you could see that there's a need to upskill, there's a need to look at other areas. You also heard from William that you need to move towards data. Not just personal data, but all kinds of data. And before we move on, we got time for just a few seconds just to comment on these. Any of the speakers would like to talk about this in terms of expanding the role of data protection towards data governance?
I just like to chime in here, as William and Lynn has talked about. In fact, a lot of data protection skills can be expanded to data governance, because you're also using a lifecycle approach. The data lifecycle, except that this is a bigger, broader base of data across different functions. But you would have actually had the role in multiple department touchpoints in the course of implementing the data protection. Here in the data governance, in fact, the data is a very important asset for the company, and which is why when you actually want to expand to data governance, in fact, understanding the value of the data, as we have actually talked about in looking at what are your business value drivers, combining that and trying to integrate the information across the organization, this is going to create a lot of value and create a lot of opportunities for the company.
So I just want to zoom in on the data strategy. Now, at this point, if your organization doesn't have a data strategy, or if you have one, even better, right? This is where the Data Protection Office, you can add tremendous value because you're already familiar with data protection skills. I want to remind everyone that a few years back, PDPC introduced the world's first DPO competency framework. And as you can see, it was not their intent to just focus on the showstopper or the data protection function. They were also looking at data innovation as part of enabling the organization, right, towards achieving their digital transformation goals. And what Straits did was, as you can see, for each of these requirements, we actually introduced courses to address the relevant competencies that were needed, right? So for those of you who are looking at specific areas to beef up your knowledge, this is something that you can look at. And for those in Singapore, you also might remember that because of COVID-19, what we did was we introduced a bunch of courses to beef up the competencies in the area of data governance. And as you can see, these 12 courses will lead you to 2 advanced certs, which will get you the advanced diploma in data governance and management. All right, so for those of you who are tuning in, to take note, there are courses you can actually look forward in terms of upgrading your skills. Now, what I do want to focus on with the rest of the speakers before we close off for today, if we knew that COVID-19 was accelerated digital transformation, we're now seeing that it is generative AI that is now requiring data governance. So before I get our speakers to comment, I would like to remind everyone that these are the trends that we are seeing, and to continue from 2023 now to 2024. I apologize, there's a typo here. I want everyone to be aware that generative AI is now moving to mainstream business productivity. There's now a need to do lots of due diligence when you adopt the Gen AI apps, and as you will see later, a lot of them also process personal identifiable information. You are seeing the movement from content creation to content generation. And it's this ease of generation that is causing lots of deepfakes in the market, and therefore we are getting lots of regulatory attention. And the technology is getting so advanced that we're now having multi-modality capabilities. Now, like all the data protection officers, to take note, because of these, there are now requirements to upgrade your skills. And very quickly, before I get the opinions of our speakers, everyone can see that with generative AI, there are now potential vulnerabilities, potential issues, potential concerns, whether you're talking about personal identifiable information in your training data, your user inputs. Lots of people are using ChatGPT. If you're sitting on the other side, you can see that you can profile the users. You can look at their chat histories. You can infer lots of personal data. There's going to be lots of leakage. Some companies are unknowingly uploading their personal, or in this case, proprietary documents into an external application. And I'm sure you guys have seen the publicity actually happening. William, your quick thoughts on this from an operational angle.
Yeah, when we talk about now going into generative AI, we are having to deal with voluminous quantity of data, some with some good quality, some dubious quality, some copyrighted, some free content, so many sources of data that AI engine can extract and analyze the data from to generate the outputs. So that's why the data governance is of an increasing importance, not only to make sure that there are proper frameworks, systems, processes to manage the data, but also to look into the responsible and ethical use of the data. Because like what Kevin has said right now, there's so many fake news that's coming out, deep fakes, all kinds of things, that people can easily misuse the generative AI to generate information that cannot be trusted. Yeah. So another aspect of having a data governance is to ensure that the trustworthy use of AI systems, such that people can trust what the output that comes out from the generative AI systems are like.
All right, so DPOs, you're going to get even more busier thanks or no thanks to generative AI. I'm going to move on because I got a question for Lynn when we talk about the laws. But at this point, I would like everyone to take a look at the next slide. This is the post-COVID-19 period. I'm sure you guys are monitoring the progress of ChatGPT or OpenAI. You've seen Google announcing the Gemini, right? And recently, OpenAI announced Sora. Now, all these are evidence that the generative AI is moving to what we call multi-modal foundation models. And you can see this slide on the side. There are 4 different kinds of modalities where generative AI is fast mimicking the digital brain. And there's a whole bunch of generative models that are difficult to explain in terms of how they generate content. But what we are seeing in the market are all these functionalities. And I would like to remind everyone that there is value in using Gen AI, but there are also risks as well as constraints. And this is why we should be monitoring it. We shouldn't just dismiss generative AI as risky. We also want to remind everyone there's also value. But the question I'd like to ask Lynn is the constraints. But before I go into the details here, I want everyone to just pause for a while and look at the risks that Gen AI offers. You can see right now that the life cycle, it is not just the usual collect, use, disclose, and store data. Because of generative AI, because of artificial intelligence, notice that besides creating and collecting the data, you're now reporting the data. That report comes from algorithms. Those algorithms could be biased, it could be inaccurate. That same data, you're now going to be using it for decision making, and therefore there's discrimination. And when you distribute it, there's misinformation, all of that. So to all of the DPOs here, if you're going to move to data governance, then you need to also expand your knowledge in terms of looking at a larger, expanded life cycle where you need to take into account AI, but also be looking at ethical AI principles, because there's going to be a bunch of AI-related issues that will haunt you, that will haunt your organization as you implement AI. So that is the question that I like to ask Lynn, because Lynn, guess what? Because of all of what is happening here, the issues, the need to have responsible AI or ethical AI, we now have the EU AI Act. Your quick thoughts, Lynn, before I close off in the next few slides.
There's a lot there. We're seeing a lot of class actions in the US on intellectual property. We don't know at this point how they're going, whether they're just opportunistic by plaintiffs' lawyers or whether they've actually got legs. We'll have to wait and see what happens in Europe. But the EU AI Act, we'll see a finalised version of it very soon, I'm expecting. How that's going to make a difference. I think it's going to make a dramatic difference given how much some of the big techs are squawking at the moment. And that's just based on what we've seen so far. So we're going to be in for an interesting couple of years.
We're going to have another session, another webinar on the EU AI Act. But for the meantime, I want to focus everyone's attention on the risk-based approach and reinforcing the importance of data governance. Now, if you were to go deeper, you will notice that there's a whole bunch of requirements that requires data governance. Here, you will notice that if your AI system is considered high risk, there are a whole bunch of requirements for the developer as well as the deployer, the company that deploys the technology. And this has implications on those of you who are in data governance. And very quickly, William, your quick thoughts on this, because if you look on these requirements of the EU AI Act, they're all related. Lots of it is about governing your data and putting a risk management framework in it. Over to you, William.
Yeah, so for those of you who are aspiring to go into data governance, there's lots of opportunities out there for you because you need to have all these skills that's available to really look and manage the data over the entire life cycle, look at the risk, look at how to mitigate the risk, keeping track of how the data is being generated, offering transparency to let the data subjects know how the data is being used or processed, making sure that the systems are reliable, the systems generate accurate content, systems do not have biases and so on. So it's a whole new field altogether, which will require new competencies, which for those of you who maybe think that you have done enough for data protection. Yeah? So this is the next big leap you can go into. Today being a leap day of the year, so I can use it.
Okay, so I'm going to close off the presentation. I want everyone to focus on the right side of the screen. You will notice that it also takes into account foundation models. Many organizations might be thinking of having your own chatbot to read your own custom data sets. So we just showed you a bunch of slides that actually indicate the importance of data governance. And for those of you in Singapore, you also might know that IMDA is pushing another governance framework. So all these are evidence that data governance is here to stay. And if you have also noticed that just this year, or shall I say last month, Singapore also introduced a new model AI governance framework specifically for generative AI. So we're now in the consultation stage. And all these, I want to remind everyone, initiatives, some regulatory, some frameworks on demonstrating the importance of having data governance. So to close off and to share with you the roadmaps, now I just want to remind you, as I do the closing, can you put in your questions and into the section that says Q&A? Just give me another 5 minutes more so I give a whole perspective on the roadmaps ahead. For the data governance officers and DPOs, put your governance team in place. With AI, get your AI governance committee, build a culture, align with your organization's digital transformation efforts. If you are in a manager role, look at how to create value. How do you manage the risk? What are the constraints of the data? You can't do whatever you like. And you heard about copyright just now being mentioned. Put your policies and SOPs in place. But most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, if you are on the ground, you are a business professional, understand the data lifecycle. Understand the importance of trust, transparency, and the efforts should be looking at increasing the value of data and decreasing the risks. So before I take questions, let me close off by sharing with you what Straits have put in place for our own community. For those of you who are looking at the potential of Gen AI, we wanted to remind you that you shouldn't be just looking at the value of it. You should be looking at it holistically, from a value, from a risk, and from a constraints perspective. There's a huge chance for you to be an AI business professional. You do not need to be technical. You do not need to be an AI scientist or a programmer. So we do have specializations in generative AI. If you are in the Philippines, we are now working with AIM University to introduce this specialized Gen AI courses that will cover the value, the risk, and the constraints. But as you can see here, there is a roadmap for all of you. Besides that, in the coming weeks, we will be making our capability as a service to all of you, because many of your organizations are actually using ChatGPT for free. You might not be aware that data is being used to train the model, and also you could be uploading your data into someone else's server. So I just want to close off by reminding everyone to also be conscious on what systems you are using to assess the Gen AI features. If you are just using the public version or even the paid version of ChatGPT, there's always a risk of your data training the AI model. There could be leakage. And you might also want to be looking at how do you upskill your staff to write their own prompts, right? So to close off, we have an AI business professional certification for you. You can get certified, and there's also a specialization in generative AI and ethics, data protection. So there's a form that you should be filling in. Tell us your interests. And for the many DPOs who are on the call, there is also an AI governance professional. This is where we are going to be helping you to prepare for the certification exam. You can put an AIGP credential behind your title. And for those of you who are looking at governance as a whole, we also have a course for you. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I am now going to pause for a while and take questions that you folks might have. Speakers, are you ready? We're going to be looking at questions that comes in, and I can also invite all of you to also take a look at the questions that are now coming in through the system. So I'm just going to kick the ball rolling, get this off the ground. Let me take a look at some of the questions. Okay, so the question here is, how do I get involved in data governance and bring up the best in the company, especially when we have assembled function heads before a PDPA working committee? So maybe I could answer that question. To me, that's even better, correct, William? Because the team is already there. So if the functions are already in place, then you can now co-opt everyone and start to chart the direction in terms of how your function can move towards data governance.
There is a comment about, there's a lot of regulations or guidelines issued and which should we follow. I'm thinking that if you're in Singapore and you're following the Singapore government IMDA, it's going to be hard to go wrong. I think some of the guidelines that we see have specific circumstances. So you've got an executive order that was made by President Biden a couple of months ago now. But so far as I know, it only relates to government sectors in the US, and that's simply because of the way the presidential power works. So one of the things you'd want to do if you don't want to use the Singapore thing is to, look at the guidelines and discard those that are clearly not relevant to you. I think with what's left, you're going to get, maybe in different orders, but you're going to get much the same things. And Kevin, you might want to talk about the 3 A's and the 3 I's, because that's the commonality. But certainly if I was in Singapore, I'd be looking at what IMDA is saying. And the Singapore government's trying to take a global role, I must say. I think Josephine Teo was at Davos releasing the information that you put up a couple of slides ago, Kevin, to try and position Singapore as a global leader. But it's certainly a leader in ASEAN, even if it might have the Philippines nipping at its ankles.
All right, so maybe let me give some guidance to the data protection officers who are thinking of looking at what's happening in the world of AI. As I go through and publish this, there's actually what we call 3 A's and 3 I's. Now, for those of you who've taken our CIPP, you would hear the word 3 C's and the 3 I's, right? So for those of you, if you really want to understand what's going on in the world of AI, the first A is what we call autonomy. And this is the part that many of us worry about, right? The system being autonomous, having a mind of its own. And a lot of us watch the Hollywood movies. Yeah, we worry that the robots will take over. But this whole autonomy is something that most experts worry about. So that's the one that AI, if it goes autonomous, what would happen? Now, for some of you might not understand the implication of autonomous. If you take a lift, the lift has a brain on its own, right? It will go up, it will go down and all of that. And it is running on an algorithm. The question here is, can AI be autonomous? And it's already happening. The second A is agency. So that who is running the AI, right? Is it developer? Is it someone deploying? Or maybe it's the agent running itself. So we need to look at the agent of how the AI is being developed, and which brings us to assurance. How do we know that the AI is safe, it's reliable, it's secure? And then the next I is actually, if you take a look, what are the indicators? How do we know that AI is working well? Because we hear about the hallucination, we read about the whole issue of biasness and so forth. And then the last 2 I's are the interface. How are we interfacing with AI? And the final I is intentionality. What are we going to do with the AI? So based on what Lynn was saying, as in the area of data governance, by looking at the 3 A's and the 3 I's, our job is to see how we could put the whole governance framework. Because there's going to be a time where the AI is going to be autonomous. It's already having a brain on its own, right? So I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I'm going to answer the next question. How do I get into the space of generative AI if I'm a DPO, right? You might not be exposed to AI as much. We would recommend that you take the AI business professional course. It's non-technical. You get a certification from the DPEX network. It's a 2-day course that shows you how to do due diligence. It also shares with you the value of how you could potentially use AI. All right, let's take a look at the next question. How would data governance function and its importance in cybersecurity?
Since my role for now is on data governance, but my main focus is cybersecurity. So I guess the question is, how do I get into a position where I'm doing more focus on cybersecurity?
Okay, so maybe you're saying that you are now actually in cybersecurity and you want to move to data governance. I assume that that would make sense, right, Lynn and William?
Data governance, I think, will be a more broader umbrella framework. Remember earlier on, Kevin showed you the life cycle. So many different stages of the life cycle. So one part of it is to protect the data, one part is to dispose of the data, one part is to distribute, one part is to collate the data and do whatever with the data. So cybersecurity, I would think, is one of the components in the entire governance framework. It's a much larger framework. Yeah.
Okay, there's another question. Given the fluid nature of the latest regulations surrounding AI, and obviously we see a lot of enhancements, right? We see ISO standards, the focus on data governance. How might DPOs today start in terms of picking a framework to kick off the compliance effort or to kick off the governance effort? We see data protection management frameworks in place. So here's my answer, right? There is a new standard called the ISO 42001. It is actually the industry's first ISO standard to manage AI. It's a management system where you can get certified, but it only just got released, I think, late last year. So that could be a good start because it mirrors the usual management framework for ISOs. So again, you can consult the ISO 42001. William, Hui Chin, Lin, any other comments? We'll just take one more question and then we will close off for today.
Yeah, I think as much based on needs as standards. So you don't just go for every standard you can lay your hands on. It's based on the needs. So the first standard I think I would advise you to go for is to set up some kind of AI governance system or governance framework. That should be the first one you should go to. So at least it gives you the holistic approach of how you can set up one of these. Then later on, maybe you want to focus more on securing the data. Then you go for something that deals with cybersecurity, or if you want to go for something that's on the ethical use of AI, then you go for that. Yeah, but it's good to get the overall holistic framework in place first.
All right, so I'll take one more last question. William, Hui-Chin, or Lynn, would you like to just look at one of those questions and answer? I'm sorry, we cannot answer all the questions.
So the last comment is responsive and responsible data stewardship is what data governance is all about, right? Question mark. Yeah, I think that's right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
Again, I want to add on the phrase that I shared just now from the ISO 38505. Yes, it's about responsible data or stewardship, but you have to remember the objective is to decrease the risk relating to data, but also increase the value of the data as your focus. Yeah, so I just want to reinforce those points, and I don't disagree what you have put in. So thank you for sharing that.
If you're in an organization and somebody says, figure out data governance, there's not a lot of point probably in going and having a search around the internet for somebody else's model to adopt, because they're going to have different considerations, different objectives, different marketplace, different reputational issues. You know, we saw the example of, was it Amazon, one of the big companies a couple of years ago in the US. They tried to set up a HR system with AI, at least coming up with shortlists, and they found it was gender biased. So they started again, and it was still gender biased. And from what I read, they genuinely tried to fix it, but in the end, they concluded they couldn't, and they abandoned the project, or at least that's what's reported.
Fantastic. I'll answer one last question. I thought this is useful. What's the best way to get buy-in from management, even when we don't have an AI plan yet, but we see staff already using AI for free? And management is still clueless as of now, don't have a direction on AI.
I don't suppose get a better job would be the right answer.
Okay, so here's my...
really, if you've got a CEO that's not going to listen to, look, we could do this, that, and the other and get more value or save costs, if you're not got somebody that's going to listen to that, really, you're going to get nowhere.
Okay, so I would offer my answer to find out whether is your management educated on the value of generative AI. And it would help. For example, at Straits, you can call us. We could demonstrate the value to your organization. You could hold a short session with your management. The other thing you can do as a DPO is you could have a meeting with them and actually show them, because it's very confusing right now. There's so many new technologies in the market, right? And you've got to tell them that even though you don't have an AI strategy, as you rightly pointed out, people are using the free version of ChatGPT. And without management's knowledge, there's going to be a lot of leakage of confidential data. So not having an AI plan doesn't mean that you don't need to have an AI policy, because your staff is still using it. So if I could sum up, you would need to educate your management, at the same time balance that with the risks and the constraints. But if your organization is already using a free version of ChatGPT, then perhaps it's time for them to start looking at how you can enable your staff with Gen AI. For example, for Straits, we have the 𝗘𝗢𝗓 platform, which is secure, and the data that you put into our system doesn't train a model, and whatever custom data sets you might have that you want to create a chatbot to interact with it, the data is also uploaded into a secure container. So you should be very careful whether you have an AI strategy or not, because your staff could be using applications that might not be approved by the organization. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we want your feedback. Let us know your quick thoughts, complete the form. Let us know your interests. And I think in the next webinar, Lynn, William, shall we do a session on the EU AI Act when it is released or when it goes into force?
Yeah, I think we're going to see the final form of it in about April or thereafter, so we should do it then. It doesn't go into force for a couple of years after that, if I recall correctly. I should know, I sat into the AI governance course that you ran, and it wasn't that long ago. I mean, it was about 3 weeks ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. We just finished one yesterday, right? So to close off this session, Lynn, based on today's theme, where we are telling every data protection officer, data protection professional, that it's time to transition towards data governance, right? Because of the developments in the AI world, what would your takeaway points be?
Be a business enabler.
That was short and sharp. Right, Hui-Chin, as the person that put together the survey, and we took a while to get it done. Here we are communicating the findings to everyone. What would your message be?
Yeah, I think it is really an important switch in the mindset when we actually look at the shift from data protection officer to data governance. Where I think one of the key thing about the mindset switch is that in data protection, you're trying to fulfill a compliance objective. But in data governance, the first question you ask is, what is my business objective? Because with that, as a guiding question, there's a lot of things that you can actually put in place to be able to help the company achieve its business objective. I think that is the key differences in terms of the data governance role.
And William, what is your takeaway, the message, especially if people don't have the IT knowledge, right? The DPOs might not have the IT knowledge. I saw one of the chat questions earlier on. What would your takeaway points be for them? Because we really shared the benefits of moving towards data governance.
Yeah, in any organization, you can't run away from having to deal with data. So there's nothing technical about handling data. You can always get the subject matter experts to look into the technical aspects. But importantly, you must know what data governance encompasses. What I will give some recommendation is that when we talk about data governance, is like how you manage any valuable asset in the organization. Could be your money, could be your manpower, could be your intellectual capital. You need to manage it in a responsible manner. You need to have good stewardship over it, and you got to ensure that you use it properly and use it efficiently to achieve the overall objectives of the organization. So even though we talk about data governance in this afternoon's webinar, we should always bear in mind that this governance framework has to align with the larger and broader governance and risk management framework of the entire organization and be driven by the objectives. Because eventually it's the objectives and the directions that are set by the organization that will move and propel the organization forward.
And with that, folks, while we are very good on time, I'd like to end with my own takeaway message for all of you. For the data protection officers, you are aware of the life cycle. You are aware that from a life cycle perspective, you need to look at your data protection principles to address the risks. But with AI, with generative AI, your life cycle has just expanded to take into account the algorithms, the decision making that's happening, and you now need to expand your knowledge to understand this expanded life cycle, as well as the AI ethical principles, in addition to your data protection principles, right? And I can tell you this, data governance will be big, and data protection officers, you are in a best position, not IT, but the data protection officers, you are in the best position because lots of the data will also concern personal identifiable information. My name is 𝗙𝗦𝗕𝗦𝗔𝗦, and I want to thank all of you, and I hope you guys enjoyed the session with our speakers here, Lynn, William, and Hui Chin. And from the Data Protection Excellence Network, have a fantastic week ahead, and we will see you in the next webinar. Thank you, everyone.